I thought my nephew was pulling away because of something I'd done. What he finally told me one quiet afternoon changed how I saw him and myself forever. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I've replayed that afternoon more times than I can count, usually when the house is quiet and the light outside has that late day slant that makes everything feel honest. I'm a woman in my early 50s now, old enough to know that some moments arrive disguised as ordinary days. You don't recognize their weight until much later. My nephew had always been a steady presence in my life. Not loud, not dramatic, just there. Growing up, he spent summers at my place, helping in the garden, listening to the old radio in the kitchen, asking thoughtful questions that caught me off guard. Then, sometime after he turned 18, he changed. Calls became shorter. Visits turned polite and rushed. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. At first, I blamed myself. That's what women my age tend to do. I wondered if I'd said something careless or if I'd become one of those older relatives who doesn't know when to step back. I missed him, but I didn't want to pressure him. Distance, I told myself, was a normal part of growing up. The day everything shifted, he showed up unannounced. It was early fall. The air smelled like dry leaves and coffee, and the screen door creaked the way it always had. I remember noticing how tall he'd gotten, how he stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done homework years ago. Sunlight spilled across the worn wood, highlighting old scratches and memories. I poured coffee for myself, tea for him, and we talked about small things, weather, work, nothing that mattered. But the space between us felt heavy, like something unspoken had taken a seat of its own. Finally, he looked at his hands and said my name the way he used to when he was nervous. My heart tightened. There was a tremor in his voice that told me this wasn't about being busy or distracted. This was about carrying something alone for too long. He told me he'd been distant because he didn't know how to talk about what he was feeling and because he was afraid I'd see him differently. He spoke slowly, choosing words with care, explaining how life had felt heavier than he expected, how he'd struggled with disappointment in himself, and how silence seemed easier than explaining pain he didn't fully understand. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer quick fixes or empty reassurance. I just listened. I watched his shoulders ease as the words finally left him. In that moment, I realized how rarely men, especially young men, are given room to speak without being judged or rushed. When he finally looked up, there was fear there, but also relief. I reached across the table and rested my hand near his, not touching, just present. I told him I was glad he trusted me enough to share this and that nothing he'd said changed how I felt about him. If anything, it deepened my respect. The house felt different after that, like a window had been opened. We sat there a long time, the clock ticking, the afternoon fading into evening. I didn't know then that this conversation would mark the beginning of a new understanding between us, one built not on roles or expectations, but on honesty and care. That was the day my heart shifted, even if I didn't have the words for it yet. After he left that evening, the quiet felt louder than usual. I stood at the sink longer than necessary, rinsing the same mug twice, watching the last of the light slip behind the trees. Something had been handed to me that day, something fragile and important, and I wasn't sure yet how to hold it. In the weeks that followed, our conversations changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that would catch anyone else's attention, but enough that I noticed. He called more often, sometimes just to ask how my day had been. When he visited, he lingered instead of glancing at the clock. There was still restraint, still carefulness, but there was also an ease that hadn't been there before. One Saturday afternoon, we took a walk through the park near my house. The path was lined with trees just beginning to turn, leaves flashing yellow and rust in the breeze. Families passed us, children laughing, dogs pulling at leashes. It was the kind of ordinary scene that makes you feel grounded, like life is continuing exactly as it should. He told me more as we walked, not in a rush, not all at once, just pieces. How he felt caught between who he thought he should be and who he actually was. How he worried about disappointing people he loved. How he'd learned to keep things inside because it felt safer that way. I recognized that instinct. It mirrored my own from years ago when I'd been younger and convinced that strength meant silence. Listening to him, I realized how much of my own life had been shaped by unspoken fears, by choosing responsibility over vulnerability. We sat on a bench near the pond, watching the water ripple as ducks drifted past. There was a pause, one of those comfortable silences that only comes when trust has taken root. He asked me how I'd known when I was truly at peace with myself. The question surprised me. No one had asked me that in a long time. I answered honestly. I told him peace wasn't something I'd found all at once. It came in moments, usually after difficult choices, when I stopped trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I told him I was still learning, even now. He nodded, absorbing that, and for the first time, I saw him, not as the boy I remembered, but as a man finding his footing. That realization stirred something deep in me. Not discomfort, but responsibility. I understood that my role wasn't to guide or correct, but to witness and support. As we walked back to the car, the air cooling around us, I felt a quiet gratitude. Life had given us a second chance at connection, one built on honesty rather than habit. I didn't know where this new openness would lead, but I knew it mattered. That evening, after we drove away, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The stars were coming out one by one. I thought about how easily distance can grow when fear goes unspoken, and how powerful it can be when someone chooses to step forward instead. Whatever the future held, something between us had shifted into a steadier, truer place, and for the first time in a long while, I felt certain that being present, truly present, was enough. Winter arrived quietly that year, the way it does when you're not paying attention. One morning, I woke to a thin layer of frost on the porch railing and a sky so pale it looked unfinished. It was during that season that our conversations deepened again, not through grand talks, but through shared moments that felt almost accidental. He came by one evening after work, shoulders tense, eyes tired. I could tell before he said anything that the day had asked too much of him. I put soup on the stove, the kind that simmers slowly, and fills the house with warmth, and we sat side by side at the counter while it heated. No pressure to talk, just being in the same space. Eventually, he spoke. He told me about his setback at work, how it made him question whether he was moving in the right direction. His voice carried frustration, but also something else, a quiet fear of standing still while the world moved on. I listened, stirring the pot, letting the rhythm of the moment settle us both. I shared a story from my own past, one I hadn't thought about in years, a time when I'd taken a job that looked right on paper but felt wrong in my gut. How long it took me to admit that to myself. Saying it out loud reminded me how far I'd come and how those missteps had shaped me more than the successes ever did. He looked at me then with a kind of attention that wasn't admiration but recognition, as if he was seeing a fuller version of me. Not just the aunt who'd always been steady, but a woman who had stumbled and learned and kept going. We ate in comfortable quiet, the clink of spoons against bowls, the heater humming softly. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, but inside felt safe. I realized that trust doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly through consistency, through showing up without trying to control the outcome. Later, we sat in the living room, the lights low, an old movie playing more for background than for watching. He leaned back, exhaling, the tension easing from his frame. I thought about how rare it is at any age to feel truly seen without being judged. When he left that night, he paused at the door and thanked me, not for the meal, not for the advice, but for listening. After he drove away, I stood there for a moment, hand on the door frame, feeling the weight of that simple gratitude. It struck me then how much strength there is in quiet support, not fixing, not guiding, just offering space. In doing that for him, I'd found something for myself too, A reminder that connection isn't about roles or titles, but about meeting another person where they are. That winter, as the days grew shorter, something steady grew between us. A shared understanding that whatever uncertainties lay ahead, neither of us had to face them alone. Spring came slowly, almost cautiously, as if it wanted to be sure it was welcome. The snow melted into the soil. The morning softened, and the world seemed to stretch after a long pause. By then, the rhythm between my nephew and me had settled into something natural. No tension, no guessing, just honesty offered when it was ready. One afternoon, he invited me to walk with him through a small trail near his place. The ground was damp, the air carrying that clean, hopeful scent that only spring brings. We walked without hurry, our steps matching without trying. It felt symbolic somehow, like proof that we were finally moving at the same pace. He stopped near a clearing where sunlight filtered through new leaves and told me he'd started making changes, small ones, speaking up when something didn't feel right, letting himself rest without guilt.